And we are live. Welcome and good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. Today is November 3rd of 2021. This is the SIG API Machinery bi-weekly meeting for Kubernetes. We have a nice agenda today. I think we have to time box some of these items. The other thing I wanted to say is that one of our tech leads, Daniel, he's out today. Everything is good, but some family reasons. So we were discussing with David that some of these topics may be good for discussion, but if there are important decisions to be made, maybe we can defer these decisions to whenever Daniel gets back, so he has a say on them. So we can try to, capture some of the open questions or decisions to be made. And of course, this is going to be recorded for posterity. Is that more or less okay, David, with you?
It is. I mean, I think I would probably say contentious decisions. I imagine some of these are not going to be contentious, but others have risk profile, and I don't believe are super urgent to make a decision on, yes, but are important to talk about so that we can see where we're going.
Sounds good. Thank you for putting it in better words. With that said, let's begin with the first topic from Mike. Mike, do you want to take it over?
Sure. I'll share my screen here. Yeah. Yeah, let me try that. So I'm looking for Firefox here. Probably this one here. Let's try that. Okay, right. Okay, so this is continuation of something we have discussed before. The issue of servers, API servers being used before they're fully initialized, or perhaps even more generally when they're not initialized or not ready. We've taken some of the motivating problems are the garbage collector and the namespace manager taking incorrect actions based on incorrect answers about whether something exists, which can happen when a Kube API server is not fully initialized. In particular, the most challenging cases are when you've got a bunch of Kube API servers, everything's going great, one of them restarts, and then a client that already thought it was talking to fully initialized API servers is all of a sudden getting answers from an API server that's not really ready. So this can confuse the garbage collector, for example, by saying that a parent object doesn't exist when it does. There's a case in the namespace manager I'm not fully familiar with. Then so the easiest case is when it just says object doesn't exist when it does. And we've taken a special bite out of that recently with a couple of PRs that returned 503 for both the case of aggregated APIs, custom API servers, external custom API servers, and CRs defined by CRDs. We've had two PRs because the API server knows that it's not fully initialized, and those PRs make it return a 503 instead of a 404 in that case. But it's a more general problem, right? So for example, before RBAC is initialized, you can get a not authorized error when actually the client is authorized. So we discussed it before and decided that the approach we want to take is a client opt-in. And the idea is a header here, a conditional header. The value is empty or meaningless. The point is just the header name that makes the operation conditional on the API server being ready. And so the idea is that when the API server gets such a request and it's not ready, and by ready, I think we mean exactly the /readyz returning true or good. When it's not ready, and this conditional opt-in is present from the client, the API server returns a 503. And we discussed a couple of variants on this. We could, for example, make the API server always return a header saying whether or not it's ready. Let's see. Then there's issues on the client go side. We would so in order to opt in, it's you start, of course, with the protocol, then you have to move up the software stack. So the idea is adding a field to or the rest.config struct. Let's see. And yeah, we would need to put something in since this is a new feature, we would want to, be able to turn it on and off. So there'd be an API server run option, turn it on and off. Let's see, I'm going to just stop there since we're trying to time box this stuff. So, thoughts, questions, responses?
Can you elaborate on which aspects of the problem remain after the PRs already in flight have merged? So do the PRs fix the fact that CRs are unavailable? And do they fix the fact that discovery may be incomplete?
Right. I mean, the problem here is, you might think that discovery kind of solves the problem because before the API server knows about something, discovery won't report it. But the problem is when an API server restarts after the client does discovery, and then it later tries to do something after this thing restarts, and the API server has lost lost its knowledge of what was there, what it previously reported. So anyway, yeah, this takes the PRs in flight, convert 404s to 503s, specifically in the case of the external servers not being aggregated yet, and the CRD type storage not being fully understood yet. So things that remain, obviously the RBAC example. I don't actually have at the top of my mind other examples, but if you just look at the stuff that's under the /ready-z, right, there's like a dozen different conditions, right? So all the rest of those remain.
Yeah, I guess I'm trying to understand what scope of problem remains after the PRs in flight merge.
So David, maybe I can answer some of that. The global discovery, it was incomplete for CRDs, and it's still incomplete. So there is something missing. There is a solution for that using this minimal mechanism we have built recently in those PRs. So I think the difference here is it's more, right? That's what Mike said. It's readiness, full readiness. Does this bring any benefit, or a different question? Do we have more use cases in mind than namespace and GC?
I think that's what I'm trying to ask, right? So if the namespace lifecycle controller and GC and getting the wrong response back for custom resources when you try to access them and API services when you try to access them, very important. I don't think that at least most of it requires this enhancement. I think the root discovery might. You said there might be some trick to fixing it. I'd be interested in knowing what that is. I'm just trying to figure out how much remains. So RBAC is a possibility, but RBAC also runs off a cache, so it can be latent technically at any time. Are there other use cases as well?
I haven't had time to answer that question. I mean, obviously, any one of us could go and look at the other conditions under /ready and see, think about them. I can't say that I've done that recently.
Okay, I think that would be a good update to this CAP so that it stays up to date with the current state of the code is. So that people can look and understand that this isn't required for correcting CR access, for instance. Because an opt-in solution there is problematic. We really should have something that is not opt-in, that's by default. And I think that's what you guys are saying is SBR is in progress.
Again, for the couple of specific cases, but sure, this is a perfectly reasonable request since this thinking work was done. Those two PRs came into being. When we were talking about it earlier, we didn't realize that we could take a big bite out of it with those two PRs. So yes, we'll update the CAP to be clear about what remains after those PRs.
Thanks. I guess I'll allow other questions there first before I ask my next one. Any other questions? If you were asking, you were on mute, so you can try again later. I'm curious why 503 instead of 429. Is it because we honor a retry after on 503s as well? I honestly don't know the client code that well.
Yes, we do retry on on 5xx as long as it has the retry after response header.
Okay, that makes sense. Thanks.
So I will bring up one other thing that we've debated in the course of composing this CAP, and I think it's a reasonable question and independent of the question of whether these PRs have fully solved the problem. Well, it kind of maybe it's actually it kind of goes back to the use cases, but when we initially designed this, we were thinking that we would be opting into rejecting requests that come in before the server becomes ready the first time. But in principle, a server can go ready and then go unready again, right? So the question really is, do we want to be conditional on the server having been ready or being ready at the moment?
Isn't this connected to what David said before? Things can be incomplete and lagging behind. So even if it's unready and you know that informers don't sync anymore, it's not a different case than when it's just slow and lagging behind. Or in other words, is this really the big enough question, readiness, or do we want more?
It's probably worth explicitly calling out, but I think I would kind of see this as past post. You sync once and that's done, but I guess depending on what the other places get hit are.
Right. I mean, I think, it's one thing to say that, clients are eventually consistent. That doesn't change the fact, though, that it's disturbing to make a request on the server and get the wrong answer. I think it's a different level of problem. But I think really it's incumbent on the previous point. We need to think about the remaining use cases that are problematic, and that should illuminate the answer probably.
Just another thought. Are there use cases where you need freshness, for example, of RBAC? When you say you don't want wrong answers, actually you want to ask the server, I want to do this request and make sure that your permission cache, your authorization is up to this resource version. That's the real thing you want to have if we want to have real consistency.
Well, I mean, in some sense, the whole system is eventually consistent. So, we do have to tolerate things being late. So I think, my gut feeling is that it's, one thing to say you haven't caught up with the change. It's another thing to say, you're completely uninformed about something you should be informed about.
I think I can see that distinction as well, where on this initial readiness, what you're dealing with is I know that I don't have enough data to answer this properly, versus I got to the point where I am accurate for some point in time after I started.
Yeah, one is about continuous, and the other thing is not, right? From 0 to I have everything versus I'm late, I miss some events. So my gut feeling is if you want this header, then readiness even after starting up should be followed, at least as it's phrased at the moment. Otherwise, it's not readiness, right?
Right. I mean, I can see, if I don't remember the cases where readiness is true and then goes false. But I imagine, again, that would be a case where obviously the code somehow knows that it's not in a good state, right? So I think the idea is when the server knows that it's not good, we accept that it can be late, right?
I believe
but when it knows that it's not good.
We have an etcd test. David, do you remember? 10 seconds or something?
Yeah, there are several. There is an etcd one. I don't recall all the others off the top of my head either.
All right, I think we've got about as far as we can. We really just need to go through more use cases and probe some examples and details here.
There is a comment in chat from you about considering HA scenarios too.
If I've understood the KEP correctly, I think this KEP handles that by taking the approach that if you use this header and you hit one server that is ready, you'll get back an answer. And then the next action you take, you hit another server that isn't ready, you'll be told to retry your request. And client Go can automatically retry that because it knows that your request wasn't honored at all. So even mutation requests can get automatically retried. And hopefully in an HA server, the next request you make, or an HA setup, the next request you make will hit a different server that is ready.
Or in any case, you'll eventually hit a server that's ready one way or another.
I suppose if your thing needs to work, even if the QAPI server is not ready, you can't use this flag, but be very careful. And there are use cases for that, right?
Right, and that's exactly why we decided we like opt-in.
Yes.
Okay. Very good. So, Mike, you're good with the discussion so far for today?
Yes, thank you.
There are some action items. We can move to the next one and we can continue in future meetings. Next one is Mo. Mo, are you around? I saw you already. Yes. Do you want to take it over?
Could I ask a question on the last thing real fast? I was just going to ask, you said it's opt-in. Is it opt-in inside of client Go?
Right, the proposal here is to add something to the config that'll tell it to opt into this.
So like it would be in the REST config at some level? The reason
Yes,
I'm asking,
yes, REST config, exactly.
Okay, I was just asking because it sounds like you could have a client that wants to ignore this because it's like some initialization client. And
exactly, right. Okay. That's why we're making it control.
Cool. So yeah, we can move on to, I guess, my topic. So I had wanted to ask, I don't see Jordan on the call, but I've been talking to him about this. Recently I've been trying to sort of coerce client Go into doing more secure TLS configs on the client side. So either TLS 1.3, which in Go does not allow any cipher suite control, or TLS 1.2 with modern ciphers like not triple DES. So today there's not like a good or straightforward way to cause client Go to do this. It basically hard codes this TLS minimum version to 1.2, and it does not say any opinion about the ciphers, which Go takes to mean all the ciphers except like 4 really catastrophically bad ones or something. So I wanted to ask if what folks thought about trying to expose some level of configuration inside of client Go to let this be tweaked. And then we did do that. Does doing so require also allowing stuff like kubectl to state opinions?
Mo, when you're talking about having it be configurable, are you talking about trying to configure it per process, which I'm mostly used to, I think, or are you like that would be like nvar override if somebody wanted to do it, or are you talking about it as like a true configuration on a REST config, or are you talking about trying to make both possible?
I don't necessarily have a strong opinion. Today it's just kind of global, and you can kind of so basically if you want to force it today, you have 2 options, both of which involve trying to force the TLS config out of the transport, which we sort of support in client Go by this unwrapping transport logic that's available in one of the netutil packages. The problem there is we have a global TLS cache for our transports, or at least their TLS configs. So it's very finicky. You're basically mutating a global state arbitrarily somewhere in your code. you can try to make this less horrible by tricking the client Go TLS cache into not doing caching by setting some fields in your REST config. So that kind of sort of works. And the way I implemented it was by using the transport wrap configuration. Problem I run into with that one is it's hard to sort of maintain over time, in the sense of if you're passing this REST config around your code base, if someone wants like an anonymous copy of it, the anonymous copy strips the wrap function off because it should, which also strips off your TLS config changes. Yeah, it's kind of neat. But yeah, to your point, David, I mean, maybe global would be good enough. I think with my recent experience trying to mess with the global TLS cache, it tells me it's going to like be painful to deal with if it's global, but maybe that's okay.
Wouldn't
I'm
it be
just trying to
easier
be
if it's global?
I'm just trying to think about common usage.
Yeah, but to the last point, right? Wouldn't it, since there is a global cache, wouldn't it be easier to make this restriction a global thing, because then everybody's agreed on what they want?
So the way the global cache works is that it tries to look at the config knobs you set on the REST config to figure out if it's already built a TLS cache that represents that configuration. So if you added, like, let's say you added 2 knobs, one for TLS version and one for Cypher Suite control, it would just add that to the cache key and then retain that. So if you continuously asked for the same TLS config, you would continuously get the same global TLS cache stuff. But if you decided in different parts of your process you wanted different things, for client Go, it seems less likely that you want to mix and match. I mean, I guess you can have a process that's talking to more than one API server, and maybe theoretically things could be different.
Right. I'm just saying that on the other hand, if we control this with environment variables, there wouldn't be an issue of it wouldn't need to be in the cache key, because everything in the cache would obey the environment variables.
Yeah, I mean, that is an approach. I'm not sure.
Right. All I'm saying is this issue of the fact that there is a cache is really a non-issue, right? The question really is, do we want to control it on a config by config basis, or is it adequate to control it on a global basis?
Yeah, that's more the question I was asking. I guess Envar is sort of beside the point. It was, is this global? It feels global.
Yeah, I mean, I suspect I could meet my use case with global, or I mean, if I can do it with global, I can obviously do it per config. So that would be fine.
I mean, the idea sounds pretty sound. It's the other half of the arguments we have for the QAPI server, but we allow it to specify what ciphers it will serve with, and this is just what ciphers I will communicate with from the client side. I think there are enough details around it to be worth describing it in a cap, because we have to decide, is it exposed in a kube config? Does it have arguments on a CLI that are standard? Right now, all our other arguments, all our other options, I believe, are standardized in CLI runtime. Knowing whether it is a global setting for a process or per instance, and if it is global, how we would even enforce that. They all seem like useful things to consider.
Yeah, let me ask the other side of this coin here about the global thing, right? I mean, obviously it's more flexible if it's in the config, right? Why would we ever choose to make it global instead of put it in the config?
Weird side effects. Like if I'm running a process and I specify that I want my client to use this, it seems like it's easier to enforce globally, and it feels like a global setting to me. But yeah, I guess if there is some reason why it's better not to be, I'm not against
Yeah, I'm
it.
surprised that you would even say that it feels global. I mean, we're talking about the characteristics of a connection, right? And a client can connect to multiple different servers, and in principle, for different reasons under different constraints. I mean, my use case, I'm familiar with, for example, cases of, hey, I want to certify this process to be FIPS compliant. So that's obviously global, right? But if we're making software for general consumption, it's not necessarily, that all the constraints are global.
I guess I'm most used to turning on a cipher preference or cipher requirement when there is a global corporate requirement that you must use these set of allowed ciphers or not connect at all. And mistakes do happen, but mistakes are costly. I've never set a cipher opinion on differently. For some connections I want this, and for some connections I want that. I've never done that before.
Right.
I mean, I recently did have to do that. I was using what I considered to be a good sane TLS config that supported a large set of servers out there, and then I tried to connect to Active Directory and it blew up. And I was like, well, thank you, Microsoft. So then I have a slightly different config for Active Directory.
And it was because the client was too tolerant on what it accepted?
No, the client was too strict. It said that anything that was reasonably state of the art for the last decade was what it wanted, and Active Directory was like, no, dude, I haven't caught up. I was like, all right.
I see. And so you would want a configuration that for everything else was strict and for Active Directory was not.
Yeah.
I mean, that could be persuasive. My opinion there isn't strong. It just doesn't match things I've done before.
Yeah, so I guess if it was expressed as you can configure the default behavior globally, but then you can override it if you want, does that sort of meet both sides of the argument?
Yeah, I think it would, because it would make accidents really hard to have. Not impossible, but hard.
Yeah, I mean, you'd probably have to do it on purpose, right? And then
exactly. Yeah, that would satisfy my concern there.
Okay, so if I understood correctly, for me, the action item would be to go write a KEP, or should I write a doc, like just a high level doc first and bring it back to the SIG? I can do the KEP if that's what folks want.
I'll say that from my perspective, this looks like a viable requirement, one that we're very likely to do. But if you want to have a review and a doc first, that sounds reasonable.
Okay. Cool. Thank you, David. Thank you, Mike.
Okay, sorry, I was trying to capture that. Very good. So let's jump into the last one today. I don't know who is next, but I was looking at the PR and there is a lot of people involved that is in the meeting. So what's the problem with this one? Can anybody speak?
Yeah, hello. So this is Alper. Nick couldn't join, and from Crossplane community, me, Muafak, and Dan are here tonight to have a discussion on this pull request. So in Crossplane, we have certain providers with over 700, for example, custom resource definitions. And, during our initial experiments or initial observations on kind clusters, we have observed that, when you try to register, hundreds of custom resource definitions, like 600 or 700 custom resource definitions, we have observed, very high CPU utilization. And, we have done some profiling on that, and, the culprit was the, JSON serialization and deserialization taking place when preparing the aggregated OpenAPI schema published from the /OpenAPI/v2 endpoint. And on the Kubernetes Slack channel, we were made aware of the memory issue. And in turn, we were made aware of this lazy marshalling pull request that was opened, for that issue in the Kubernetes repo. We have also raised another issue for CPU utilization. And, we did some further observations on real GKE clusters, like on, zonal GKE clusters. When you register 200 and 250 custom resource definitions or so, it looks like, we can cause service disruptions on the control plane of the GKE cluster. And, for regional GKE clusters, when we try to register about 500 custom resource definitions or so, we have observed that the, control plane becomes unresponsive for about an hour. So as we were made aware of this pull request that addresses the memory issue, we also, wondered whether, it enables to register, hundreds of custom resource definitions in our use cases. And we did some tests, with the proposed pull request, the lazy marshalling pull request, and we have observed substantial improvements. So we would like to discuss whether it will be available, to merge this pull request, and whether it will be available to cherry pick them to the active Kubernetes release branches.
David, can I comment maybe?
Yeah, I was going to hand it off to you and whoever it is on the Google side.
Antoine, maybe if he's here, I think the background of this is the V3 work. It was agreed to make this lazy, and I don't see a reason why we shouldn't do it. Just a clarification: when you say creating CIDs, you are really saying you are one by one creating CIDs, or the controllers and API extensions, API server update them, and on every those updates you get a trigger for a new spec, right? Mm-hmm. I think it's limited today to 10 or to every 10 seconds or something like that. I think there's a rate limit, but it's not very strong. I could imagine that more rate limiting would also help here, but I don't know a reason why this shouldn't merge. I think the intention of Antoine is to get it ready, and he comments heavily as you see there. There's some open issues from 16 hours ago, so work is being done.
Stefan, do you have confidence in viability for a backport? And this is me not knowing how deep the rabbit hole goes, because that's the other part of this question.
I haven't checked this PR, I will. But in theory, I don't think this is changing the fundamental algorithm at all. It just changes the controller today, which is maybe a bit rate limited, changing it into an on-demand, whatever it is. It's not a normal request where this is becoming critical to, for example, to be computed within 60 seconds, I think. This is something to check. So we have a limit of 60 seconds for requests. I'm not sure this applies to OpenAPI as well. My question, I'm curious, 700 CIDs, how long does this aggregation take?
Yeah, so according to our experiments, without this PR, on a local instance of Kube API server, we have observed that, for example, just the application of the custom resource definitions, of course, completes in, for example, in 1 minute or so, but the total aggregation time takes, you know, in the order of 20 minutes or so. And in GK,
I can imagine.
Yeah, in GK clusters, it's, you know, something like 40 minutes or 50 minutes.
I remember, I'm not sure, I think it was half a second roughly for one merge of the big spec. And if you multiply that with 700,
yeah,
it's a number. So we are talking about 5 minutes or so for 700 probably.
Yeah, it's actually like increases by the more you add. For example,
Yes.
initially it takes like, you know, half a second, and then 600 takes like, you know, 50 seconds almost.
It's linear, exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because
Anyway,
like, I was just gonna say we conducted some rate limiting experiments as well, like checking the JSON schema to make sure aggregation is completed, and then applied the next ones as well. But it's just like, you know, we couldn't get it under 40 minutes, 40 or 30 minutes.
One point is, if you have kubectl running in the background, updating the spec, you get the same behavior, right? We will never solve that, even not by lazy marshalling.
Do you mean the discovery client timeouts?
No, if you have a kubectl, which I think it does the etag get on the spec in the beginning. So it will notice, it will not re-download the spec, but it will check for freshness. And if you have a client, which, I mean, in the big cluster, and you have one client which downloads OpenAPI, and this is run every 30 seconds, you're back in the same old behavior of basically hot looping.
Yeah, I noticed that with the Alper's tests that, like, you know, once the initial burst completes the aggregation, because it's not all lazy, but like some part of it, and then the first request to open API v2 is pretty fast because it just does it, like, you know, all of them at one time. So, like, you know, we don't experience such problem, like, you know, after, I guess, like, you know, 1 minute or so of the application of the CRDs.
Just
Yeah,
add to.
Actually, go ahead, Howard.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Just add to what Stefan said. If you have a kubectl pulling the OpenAPI spec from Kubernetes server as fast as it can, you still get the same number of marshalling in the aggregation layer. But for the API extensions, API server, it's used to be one marshalling for one CRD creation, but with lazy marshalling, I think it becomes one marshalling per second because the aggregation layer pulls the spec from API extension API server every second. That's what we hard code. Yeah.
Yeah, this can be. Anyway, so I don't think there's a reason not to move forward with that. It's planned anyway. V3 will make it even better because we split up the spec by group. So being lazy is more effective if we go to V3 at some point. So ping and run to get the review finished, and I think it will.
Yeah, I was going to say,
move.
Antoine is not on the call, but we have the author. Kermit is here, Hawaii is here, Jeffrey's here, Stefan is here. Looks like, unless anything comes out and we were not expecting, there is no reason to believe that this cannot be merged. Correct?
Yes.
And also, like, you know, what do you think about cherry picking it to the active branches after it's merged?
It depends on complexity and risk. I haven't seen the PR, so it looks small, 150 lines. So maybe yes. I have no strong opinion. I'm not sure. David?
Yeah, in general, for a severe enough performance problem, we will backport a fix to address it in prior releases, but it depends on the complexity and risk of the fix. So once it's reviewed and merged, it'll be, say, Antoine or the same people that that Fede just mentioned, deciding whether the risk benefit is there.
Gotcha. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I just checked the cherry picking guide, like, you know, before the meeting. I guess the performance issue, you mean, like, you know, it falls under the crashing, hanging, or, like, you know, panicking.
Yeah, I
then
don't
could be
expect.
like an
Yeah,
argument for that.
yeah, it's a problem. Although I am impressed you managed to get it that high. 700 CRDs, that's pretty good.
Yeah, we enable code generation to generate like CRD from the whole Terraform providers. So that's quite a lot.
I'm curious, is there no other bottleneck, like discovery, for example?
Yeah, that is also another bottleneck, but like, there's a PR addressing it, and it's not as urgent as this one because we can just ask people like, hey, update your kubectl to the latest one to not deal with that discovery plan problem. I think Nick reported that like it's like 6 minutes of discovery for kubectl. But yeah, it's just like, easier to ask them to update the newest kubectl when that other PR has been merged. Is merged.
Very good. Okay, so
yeah.
let's stay on the issue. I don't know, Kermit or Jeffrey, any final thoughts?
No, everything sounds good to me.
Okay, very good.
Well, one thing I also wanted to ask, like, is there like any action item for me or for Alper or for us to do, like opening an issue or like, opening cherry pick PRs or like, whatever is needed?
Action items. At least with the cherry picking, that may be a thing for. It sounds like maybe for Antoine. I think there's a couple open things on the PR itself, but I'll get to those later today. So those should be. I don't think there should be anything open on the PR, relatively imminently. So it should be ready to merge pretty soon.
Okay. Sounds good.
Sounds good.
Thanks.
Okay, let's keep an eye on it. And that was our last topic of the day. I want to thank everybody for your time. So unless anybody has anything else, we can close the meeting here. Sounds good? Very good.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
See y'all.